Good morning, everybody. This is Walk the Dog Season 2, Episode 32, and I'm recording this Monday at lunch because somebody on Twitter said they wanted more Walk the Dog, and I had a spare half hour, so I figured, why not? And I'm recording a Walk the Dog. So hopefully everyone's doing well. Let's see, things with me. This weekend was my wife's birthday. We had this whole trip planned. And then unfortunately she got sick, so we had to skip the trip, which was a little sad. So I ended up being dad duty for the weekend. Though the good news is my kids are at the age now where they don't require that much supervision. It's more like make sure they're fed. So I ended up using that time to set up my office, organize some cards a little bit, and get a little bit of my own stuff done I needed to get done. But otherwise, things were good there. You'll notice there's no giant pile of cards here anymore. But yeah, and then I also played some TFT. I got plus 130 LP. So that was nice. It's, whatever, just poking at the set, trying to think about things in the future. So that's been going on. Let's see, what else? Yeah, PvE is going through the testing for the upcoming patch. A lot of people have been trying it out, giving us feedback, which has been good. A lot of iteration to do there, so we got to make sure that happens. Yeah, live team is working on it today. It should all get locked in today, which means it'll go to PvE tomorrow. That's supposed to be our regionals patch. The good news is, other than a couple exceptions, things seem to be in a pretty solid state on PvE. I'm specifically talking about PvE. T-Hex being one that even after the nerfs is still looking really strong, which T-Hex in particular, by the way, has opened my eyes a little bit to the concept of channeled spells and how challenging those can be to balance specifically. So just an interesting thought. It's less about T-Hex specifically and more about a spell that drains mana over time that's really interesting. So yeah, trying to think if there's anything else major to talk about. Oh, I suppose the only other thing is, like I said, this is episode 32. I'm going to have episode 35 be the season 2 finale, at which point I'll probably take a break from Walk the Dog for a little bit until sometime after the next set ships, and then we'll start season 3. Hopefully by then I can get back to walking outside. I figure that's a good break point too, of like every season can have a different backdrop. But getting back to my walks being outside and actually walking, I think would be good. Oh, and then one other thing I wanted to shout out was there was the TikToker / Twitter user who did the little parody video of my Walk the Dogs, which I thought was really, really great. I thought summing it up into 60 seconds, I thought was really funny. So that was just a great video. I thought that was funny. I retweeted it if you haven't seen it, but that one made me laugh for sure. And stuff like that always brings a smile to my face. So, okay. I looked through the questionnaire and got some good questions. I tried to find some spicy ones today so that this wouldn't just be, boring. So hopefully these are some interesting spicy questions. So here's what we got. First one is, what do you think about the XP change from 7 to 8 now, looking back at it? And this has been, I think, one of the more controversial changes of the set. It doesn't get talked about that much anymore, other than in the form of, because of the XP change, people feel like they need econ augments to be able to participate and reach that level 8. Because really, when we were adding the change, the goal was to make level 7 last a little longer, because really in set 14 and 15, people were literally skipping level 7, right? It was just literally go from like 6 on 3-2 to 8 on 4-1, and like, that's it. That was kind of the idea behind it. But all that really did was make that more, like, people didn't change their behavior. They just said, well, now the only way I can do what I used to do was with these econ augments. And so even though that the data doesn't support that econ augments are required, people feel that, especially at lower elos. And so that has created a bit of a negative feels. So your original question is like, how do you feel looking back at it? I feel like it was a Band-Aid, is my honest answer. I think it was an appropriate Band-Aid that was needed, but I kind of wish the better version... The challenge is this all goes back to our econ system. Currently, econ in general, we know that lower elo players struggle more to generate econ, and because of that, they're always at a disadvantage. And then how you use that econ and the difference of that econ matters. And the question is, what does that econ generate in terms of value? And in the old way, like I said, the right players were using econ to essentially fast 8, fast 9 pretty frequently. Because the other thing too is if you look at set 14 and 15, it was get to 8 and then stop, right? Because the gap from 8, because the other thing that's not talked about very much is that the gap from 8 to 9 and 9 to 10 got lowered so that more people could actually play level 9 and 10. Level 10 basically did not exist in set 15. Nobody ever went to 10. And so we fix that as well. People are hitting 10 this set, you know. But all of this is to say that what I actually wish we could do is a slight deflation. But the problem is, let's say you just did a slight deflation on everything, right? Put the XP back and deflated all econ augments 30%. Hell, let's exaggerate. Let's do 50%. Really, all that does is punish lower elo players so that you must play around the base econ generation perfectly, or the win streaking and stuff like that, right? Because basically the more sources of econ there are in the game, the less each individual source matters impactually. So what I mean by that is if you have your augment and you have win streaking and loss streaking, and you have your normal generation and stuff like that, each of those matter. But as soon as you take one away, the only two left matter a bunch more. And so if you play those wrong, which especially, like I said, the base econ is the biggest one here, it just becomes much harder to get into the game. And so by having additional sources of econ, that can be good. We see this on, maps like Scuttle Puddle and stuff like that. But all of this is to say is that, do I think there's too many resources in the game? Yes. This is where the audience segmenting also becomes a problem, because it's like, do I think there's too much econ in the game for our challenger players? Yes, absolutely. I absolutely do. I think challenger players have just a ton of econ and a ton of resources to work with, and they figured out ways to manipulate them to maximize those resources in ways that create consistency levels that I'm personally not comfortable with. But for of our like diamond and lower players, do I think there's too much econ? Not by a lot. I mean, a little, but not by a lot. And I think if you just did that 50% nerf to like every econ augment, obviously I'm saying with appropriate nerfs to everything else, right? I'm not saying like, obviously no one's picking raining gold if it's half value compared to, say, big grab bag. But all this is to say that I think playing with gold and pressing reroll is fun. And so and that's been one of the negatives of the XP change, right? Is like you hit level 8 and you have less gold to roll. Now here's the other interesting thing is what we did with level 8 was we said, hey, it's going to be harder to hit, but we upped the odds for cost from 22% to 30%, which meant you got to press the reroll button and have fun with that and actually play the game, and actually hit your units. Sorry. That was the trade-off, is at 22% with the lower XP cost, you would get there with more gold, but you'd press reroll a bunch and just miss. Whereas now you get there with a little less gold, but you're more likely to hit. And so that's the trade-off. And we're not in a point where I think a small change is going to fix this, right? Like right now, let's say the 30% drops to 27%. Does that change anything? Not really. Maybe 25% changes something, but then we're back to what I think a lot of people experienced in like the level 10 through 13 era, which is like the level 8 lottery. You go to level 8 with 40 gold, pray you hit on your roll down. If you don't hit, I guess you lose, right? Like there's something much more systemic about the way we approach the game right now that needs to be resolved if we want to evolve TFT to the next step, which is the game can't be about pick your line, generate as much econ as possible, get to 4-1-4-2, go to the appropriate level, and then roll down and hit or not. Like, there's got to be more options than that And like I said, I think the XP change didn't necessarily introduce more options, which is why I'm not a huge fan of it as like a best solution. But I do think having at least level 9 and level 10 be options this set was healthy. I think level 7 mattering a little more was good, although it did make the game harder. I see a lot more people die at 4-3 than I did, in previous sets. And I think especially with the current 4-cost meta, yeah, I don't know. It's tough. It's definitely a tough one. And this is one of those ones, remember how I told you guys if I had infinite time and resources, what I would do is sit there and mess with the game systems? This is definitely one of those examples where I'm talking about where like the game system, the relationship of econ to leveling, to XP, to econ augments and all that stuff, I think is still a space that like there's room to get it right. It's just a question of the value of the time to the gain, right? Like let's say I personally spent 2 months trying to find the perfect XP to gold system. And I found that, would it be that much better than what we have now? Maybe not, right? Maybe it's a little better. Maybe it's, 10% better. Or maybe the challenger players notice it, but most of our players don't. At which point, that's the hard thing about, our job is we have to figure out the best time to value that we can do for any of these changes. So, yeah, I don't know. I kind of went off a bit of a rant there, but all in all, to sum this up, how do I feel about the XP change from 7 to 8 now? I think it was a good band-aid for this set. I think it did its job for this set. I don't think it is the perfect solution long term. I think there's still something off about the relationship of econ and leveling, but I'm not quite sure what it is exactly. So there you go. All right, next question. Now, I had introduced the Google form so that people could submit questions without going to my Discord. I went and looked at that today, and I'll spare you the short answer is that at least one person felt the need to turn that Google form into their dumpster of very hateful things to say to me. The funniest of which to me was that my ugly Asian wife, even though my wife's not Asian, but so I had to close the form. I just don't really want to do that. But there was one sort of mean-spirited question, but I actually think is worth talking about. It's a good conversation. So I'm going to read to you the question. Why are you clowning on your own game with Exodias everywhere? 3-star 4 costs, 10 Yordle, 10 Bilge, etc. Half the competitive games and on an Exodia, game is supposed to be about being flex, not hitting the lottery for one stupid play. So, why am I clowning on my game? Well, I don't know if I'm clowning on it. But again, I actually do think this is an interesting topic and worth discussing about, which is, and something Peter and I have talked about as well, which is, do Exodias have a place in TFT? Are they good for the game? What's going on? So, all of this is to say that I believe for a lot of players, especially casual players, the most memorable games you have are when you hit something weird and abnormal, and that you remember it as like this crazy high roll or this just unique experience, right? And it doesn't have to be an Exodia. A good example was last night when I played a game. I took the augment, the threes augment that gives you a random emblem. It gave me a Zon emblem. And then my second augment was the Earth one that says whenever you have a spatula, gain some attack speed, and here have a spatula. And I used that to make a second Zon emblem. And so I had 2 Zon emblems, and it was like, I remember this as that weird Zon game where I had 2 Zon emblems. Neat, right? One of the joys of TFT is having that unique experience you haven't had before in a really unique way. Now, I've also told you guys that the power of a unique experience has to be relative to the frequency and difficulty at which it appears, right? 2 Zon emblems, it's rare. It's not that rare. And I would say the power is actually pretty appropriate. It's like, oh, cool. You can hit 7 Zon, but there's no chase. And because you can hit 7 Zon, you can play stronger units and have things like Defender and Piltover active, and that's really good and cool. And I think I did pretty well that game. It was either second or first, because I ended up with like a Zon Kindred 2. It was pretty cool. But Exodias are like supposed to be this incredibly rare thing, right? 3-star 5 costs. prismatic traits, stuff like that. But right now, are they too frequent? We know 3-star 4 costs certainly were. I think they might still be too frequent. I haven't looked, to be honest, in the last week. Things like 10 Yordle, 10 Bilge are certainly more common than I'd like. But by even existing, there's this other problem we have, which is like, let's take our average player, just like an average non-challenger player, and let's say that average player, and this is a fake number, this is not the real number, but let's say the average player plays 50 games a set, right? How many things should we be putting in the game that are these like chase experiences, and how often should a player who plays 50 games get to experience them, right? If we put a bunch of things in the game that no one ever gets to experience, what's the point of putting them in, right? We already have this with 3-star 5 costs. 3-star 5 costs are supposed to be the kind of thing that you like experience once every 50 games or so, if you're lucky. Some players a lot less, right? But then also, we have this expectation that every 3-star 5 cost have this really cool, beautiful ceremony, and the way they delete the board is really fun and awesome, right? Like fiddlesticks turning the screen dark and stuff like that. You know, so that becomes, again, the value proposition there is tough. But all of this is to say that, yeah, it also is a strategy game. And, you know, part of the strategy is playing to your outs, right? Like, I think sometimes it's correct to look at your board state and go, ooh, you know what? Even going to level 9 here isn't going to make me strong enough to beat that other guy. The only other way I have to beat him is to take the long shot and roll for the 3-star 5 cost. So I think having some long shots like that is good. What I don't love is the long shots. To be honest, I think prismatic traits are one that I'm like not as happy with, because those become less about a long shot opportunity that happens later and more like, oh, it's 2-1 and it's the extra emblem encounter. Or it's 3-2 and I got this augment, therefore I'm now approaching this win condition that I either binarily hit or I don't, right? So, again, all of this is to say that, why do we have Exodia in the game? Well, the answer is because it's fun. Players really love trying to hit these rare Exodias. It's their most memorable moments. And for our wider player base, it is absolutely important that we have these exciting things. Otherwise, every game feels the same. Every game just feels like a stagnant, hit your baseline. And we need the variation. Like, again, one of the appeals of TFT is that there is a lot of different experiences you can have. And when you have them, they're really cool and unique. That's what augments provide. We need those. But the question is, are our current Exodias correct? I'm not as confident in that, right? I think prismatic traits, for all the good they've done, prismatic traits are especially hard, right? Because over time, I've become more and more convinced that vertical traits from a mechanical standpoint, even just like a 7-piece trait, is actually not doing good to the game, right? Like, if the only way to play Demacia is 7 Demacia, well, then the amount of different boards you can build around 7 Demacia are pretty limited, and every Demacia game feels the same. But the problem is, when you have 10 Ionians, especially our casual players, they want that 10 Ionia to exist. They're like, hey, I should be rewarded for this thing I hit rarely, right? We even have players right now who are like, why isn't 6 Invoker in the game? You should be putting 6 Invoker in the game. Why doesn't 8 Arcanist exist? That should be in the game, right? Like, it's one of the things that was fun from the original auto chess, is that chasing the traits was fun. But again, the power of those traits and how easy they are to hit are two very different things. And even if you take a small trait like Piltover, let's say we have Piltover 6, and let's say we added 8 Piltover, right? So in order to hit 8 Piltover, you would need 2 uncraftable emblems. Well, that's really hard to do. But if you hit 8 Piltover, shouldn't you be really rewarded for it? Probably, right? But that's just it. The contradiction of it existing and being rare makes players think it needs to be powerful. But by it existing, players want to chase it and feel bad when they can't hit it. And so that's why I think over time you've seen me actually pull out some of these higher trait breakpoints. I've been a big proponent of, I don't want 8 Brawler in the game. I don't want 8 Defender in the game. I think they do more harm than good. They're barely functional comps. and then players perceive them as these Exodia things, As funny as it was back then, Worlds being won by 8 Bodyguard because they got an emblem was probably not the healthiest competitive thing we could have done, So it's a tricky balance. This is, and I guess all of this goes back to a lot of today's conversation, if you can't tell, continues to be about this audience, challenge that we've got, which is making sure that everyone can enjoy the game so it stays popular, stays, exciting, stays fun to play, but also fair enough that it doesn't just turn into some other game that, is just pure randomness all the time and it's hard to express skill in any way. Now, the good news is I don't think we're anywhere near a game that isn't good to express skill on, because right now, Weijin just won 3 cups in a row. So clearly he's expressing skill. And, even if he didn't win all 3, let's say he only topped, he only got final lobby in each one. That's still insanely impressive, So we're definitely a skill expressive game. I don't know, I'm getting a little off topic, but the point is, I do see some of the pain around Exodias. I do think some of them are too frequent, but I do think we are going to continue to have at least some Exodias, because some Exodias create the dream and excitement to chase after, and it will continue to be our job to make exciting things for players that when they happen rarely, feel good, but also feel justifiably relevant or justifiably relatable to the power that they're supposed to give. So, yeah, there you go. All right, like I said, that person could have worded that question better, but still a good topic. So, all right, next one. I'm going to do this one really quick. How valuable is PBE data? The answer is meh to not really. At the start of the set, the good news is we have a lot of people playing PBE. So PBE data there is a lot closer to just data in general. The only problem there, though, is that we don't have really good MMR. A lot of people who play PBE will have like pretty different MMRs, and even some of our best players, their MMRs can look off, or they'll be pre-made lobbies, things like that. So the data gets pretty skewed, but it is the best version of that. Now let's take something like what's going on right now, which is this like PBE stuff that our pro players are doing. The sample sizes are just so small. That's one of the things I always hate when we watch a tournament and we're like, oh, this comp had 7 games behind it and it averaged a 3.8, therefore it's strong. It's like, well, is it? That's not quite the right conclusion. So the actual just like numerical data, it's worth looking at, but it's not like you're going to get the best conclusions for it. But what I think is much more valuable is the experiential feedback that we get, especially from some of our most dedicated players, right? And so, like, again, using the current state we're on right now in PBE, as cool as it is to see the data, I'm less excited to be like, I don't know, guys, this one unit sitting at like a 4.2, you're like, that's not that great. But what I do care about is like, hey, the pro players are playing, and what they're saying is they're noticing that the meta right now is, they had to ban T-Hex, that's a problem, and also they're finding caster items just to be really, really tough to use, and, reroll just doesn't exist. It's like stuff like that is still really, really valuable. Or even like, hey, the unlock condition here just doesn't quite feel right. Like, all of that stuff I find much, much, much more valuable, especially because a lot of these players have been playing TFT a long time. And so a lot of their instincts about what feels wrong is actually very correct, right? So we need to find the solves for, because if they're saying it feels wrong, it probably feels wrong for a lot of our players, And so I take a lot of that feedback really seriously. And it's the same with the start of a set on PBE. At the start of a set, we want to make sure that like, hey, I've been playing TFT for a couple years now, and I'm playing with this new content, and ooh, this is weird, It's also one of the reasons why I get kind of pushback. I push back a little bit when people start reacting to like just the notes, right? Because a lot of our players are really not that great at like looking at numbers and understanding the impact. I'm going to pick on Frodan because I know he'll be comfortable with me picking on him about this, but I think Frodan, as much as I love his patch rundowns, sometimes his read on like the impact of what a number does is just notoriously off, right? It's because that's not really how he approaches or understands TFT, and that's fine because he clearly approaches it from other ways much better. But that's why when Froden starts playing the game, I'm much more interested because it's like, okay, Froden, now that you've played it, what felt right, what felt wrong, because he has a good feel for it. That's true of a lot of our players, so that's why generally I really, really value that experiential feedback. So that's what I value much more on PBE. So, yeah. All right. Yeah. I'm trying to think. Though I guess the one other topic, though, I will say one of the things I do miss is being able to have the time to stream PBE on the weekends, because I felt like getting my own hands for that experiential feedback mattered a lot, right? So this would be, hey, like, for example, these unlock conditions, I will tell you 100%, I have not played a game on them yet, right? Because I'm supposed to be working on Futureland stuff. And so as a game designer, that does bother me a bit that like I can't put my 100% signature on them because I haven't sat down and experienced them, right? There's, again, something much more important about experiential feedback. It's one of the reasons why I try to play as many live games as I do. But I do think back when I used to stream PBE and play that, it was valuable for that reason. I could give experiential feedback on these changes. And so, for example, if I were playing with these unlock conditions, I could be like, ooh, yeah, I'm noticing this and this. And so, yeah. So, and it's tough, though, because that also required weekends, and telling devs to also play the game all weekend is not really correct. So, probably not the best choice. So, anyway, all right, we're at time. I had 2 more good questions. I'll try to save those questions and do them tomorrow. One I thought was really good, which was like, what's the benchmark for a WeWork? Just balance changes, and how do I think Annie turned out? So I'll try to get to those hopefully tomorrow or something. But yeah, so all right, there you go. There's your walk the dog. I guess the only other thing I'll say is that the person who asked for me to do this walk the dog on Twitter was somebody that I wrote one of those manifestos last patch. And while I don't agree with the tactic of writing that manifesto, I at least have come to understand that it's more of a venting mechanism and things like that. But I also think this is why it's important to have proper outreach sometimes between devs and players, because really what that was coming from was a place of frustration in our player base and passion. And so spending the time to just go, okay, cool, what's wrong? What can we do about it? And then talk. I don't know. I try to mend those gaps where I can, and so hopefully this player feels listened to, So anyway, all right, that's it. I think my lunch just finished. I can hear it beeping downstairs. So I'm going to end this and call it a day. All right, that's going to do it for me. Until next time, take it easy.